And so I think that's what we're seeing is we're seeing people trying to figure out how to deal with maybe they've been abused, their mental illness, their fear of growing up and being a female or being a male, or their obsession with the other sex, the hypersexualized ideas of the other sex. The list goes on. You're seeing people make these changes to deal with whatever variety of condition that they have.
Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden." The world needs that light more than ever because there's so much confusion. And the darkness moves in on us through a lot of issues like the one we're going to be talking about today. I'm sure you've noticed how the issue of transgender has skyrocketed back into the news. Through the Scarmetti case being argued at the Supreme Court, to issues of men in women's sports. And obviously, this is something some Ministries students ask about all of the time. One of the people giving clarity on this issue, and we're specifically going to talk about intersex conditions today, because that's one of the ways there's a lot of confusion. Well, these intersex people exist. So this is it's biological reality that transgender is really a thing. How should we think of all of that? How can we be the light to the world with really tough issues like this that people surrounding us face all of the time? Well, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. We're exploring where God is at work, changing everything through Jesus, who is the incarnation of the truth by his Holy Spirit. Today, we're going to talk about how truth changes the way we address very delicate and tough topics like intersex and transgenderism. How do we do that with the love of Christ? How do we handle this in our churches? My guest today is Alycia Wood. Growing up, Alycia always had questions. She wanted to dig deeper into the Christian faith. She was never satisfied just listening to the Sunday sermon, and that fueled a search and a journey to find answers for the big questions in life. So while she was studying for a degree in criminal justice and sociology at Robert Wesleyan College, Alycia discovered apologetics, and it changed the course of her life. She went on to get a master's degree in social justice from Marygrove College. She's passionate about serving those in need in the developing world, and now she's spent over 10 years doing full-time apologetics ministry. We're going to talk about that in the show a little bit. She travels, she speaks on various topics relevant to our culture for an organization called Apologetics Inc. So please join me in welcoming Alycia to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Alycia Wood, welcome back to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. I enjoyed myself last time, so it's great to be back with you.
Well, these are always fun conversations with you. I appreciate your realistic the way you approach things, but your deep apologetics knowledge. And before we dive in, I want to ask you, because you're with Apologetics Inc. now.
Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit about that, because I think there are probably people watching or listening who think, if only I could get a speaker like Alycia or some of her colleagues to my campus, to my church, we would be better off for it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah, sure. So Apologetics Inc. is an organization that's been around for over 20 years. Early on, they were able to grab the URL apologetics.org. So we're easy to find at apologetics.org. And there are 4 speakers, Mike Sherrard, Megan Allman, Matthew Mittelberg, and myself. And we speak on a variety of topics. So everything from morality to evidence for resurrection and Bible credibility, abortion, beauty, God of the Old Testament. I mean, the list goes on and on. For me personally, I've been speaking on this gender and intersex topic now for about 2 years. 2 years ago, I said, I won't be speaking on this. This is not what I'm going to be speaking on, 5 years from now. I was like, I give it 2 years. Well, it's lasted little longer than I thought, but the decline is happening in terms of there's a cultural shift in response to this gender topic. And so I saw that coming, and I was like, this is not going to be something that will need to be addressed, but it's going a little slower than I imagined, but it's happening. And so specifically on gender. So if somebody wants to find us, you can easily find us at apologetics.org. And just really quickly, if there are any pastors, youth pastors, anybody out there, I'm an apologist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a biologist. My undergrad was criminal justice and sociology. But the reason why I've taken on this topic of gender is because the church is really struggling. And nobody taught pastors in seminary how to know whether or not somebody's male or female, right? They didn't teach that in apologetics school either. And so I just encountered, I know so many pastors are like, what do we do? How do we handle this? Youth pastors the same. I talk to youth pastors who say they've got kids transitioning in their youth group. Please, 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 please reach out and take advantage of the resources that you have. I mean, this is a talk I do or topic I deal with for the church. It's not what I talk about on secular campuses. So just take advantage of the fact that we are a resource for you, and we would love to be there should you need that help.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, everybody on the faculty of Apologetics Inc. is also a Summit Ministries instructor. So if you're watching or listening, these are people we trust to come and address the students we work with. And you've spoken at Summit many, many times, and you've really helped to bring a lot of clarity to especially the issue of gender. So here's where we are culturally. And you and I were chatting just briefly about this before the show. Transgenderism in the culture, we thought, it had its moment and it's going to fade.
Right.
But the reality is sports, men and women's sports, was in the back of the minds of a lot of people in the recent election. I don't think they voted on that issue, but I think it definitely was in their minds in terms of the credibility that they assigned to one side or the other. And then, of course, we have the Scarbetti case argued before the United States Supreme Court. We won't know the results of that probably until next summer sometime.
Right.
But the arguments that came forward, including a transgender person making the arguments in front of the Supreme Court, brought this issue front and center once again. What can states do as far as medical transition support or banning or different medical treatments and all those kinds of things? And it seems like we're pretty divided. Like half the states are saying, we're going to regulate this because we think this is really bad for kids. And the other half are saying, we're going to protect this because we think it's good for kids.
Yeah.
So you probably live in one of these states where it's a battleground. If you're watching or listening, this is something that's of immediate concern. But you mentioned something that just breaks my heart. If you're a pastor or youth pastor, you're a parent, and you see a child struggling with this, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because they're so confused about their identity, and they have been told, if you're uncomfortable in your body, which most young adults are at some point in time, then your body is the problem and you can fix it using medicine.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. Well, that's kind of the background.
No, it's good background.
It's okay. So we got 35 minutes. We're going to solve this.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely solve it in 35 minutes when I speak on it. Sure. So we're going to do great. Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. So one of the things that people have said often is, but these intersex people exist.
Yeah.
Okay. They say it isn't true that male and female are a binary because there are people who are intersex. Yeah. What are they saying, Alycia? Because it goes against the grain of what just about everybody observes when they look at the differences between men and women.
Yeah, so this is, for people who aren't familiar, intersex is the I in LGBTQIA, okay? So it's a really important letter that oftentimes I think is quite confusing because of the word, right? It's intersex. We kind of think it's like in the middle, or it's an amalgam of both sexes. Like, so these are people who are both male and female. And that actually is it's easily to come to that conclusion, but that's actually not the truth. People who are intersex are not people who are both male and female. And in fact, we have no cases at all in humans in which somebody's both male and female. And the reason why is because male and femaleness, while we were all taught in like biology class in school, is, females are XX and males are XY. That is true for most humans. But that's not even true when you it's not even true for all mammals, and it's not even true when you cross species. So for example, like a female bird is ZW chromosomes and a male bird is ZZ chromosomes, right? So you can't use XX and XY to determine male and female once you leave humans. And so a more accurate way of doing it that's going to be consistent across species is to look at your gametes. So your gametes
Yes.
are whether you're an egg producer or a sperm producer. And so regardless of your chromosomal makeup, is your body moving along the egg production process, or is it moving along the sperm production process? And if you're moving on the egg production, you're female, sperm production, you're male. And this is going to be consistent across species, whether you're a bird, whether you're an alligator, whether you're a gorilla, whether you're human, it doesn't matter. You're going to either, if you're egg producer, you're female, male, or sperm producer, you're male. There are some exceptions, of course. There are some animals that actually are what we'd say true hermaphrodites, but they would be barnacles, snails, slugs, and those are not at all what humans are. Okay, so all that to say that those animals are actually going to possess like the full reproductive anatomy of both male and female, but humans don't, it doesn't apply in humans and overwhelming majority of species. So intersex people actually are not people that have both egg and sperm. That does not exist. We do not have a single condition in humans where they are both egg producers and sperm producers. And the main reason for that is that it's one organ, ovaries in women or testes in men, that will become either an egg producer, they'll become ovaries and be egg producers, or that organ will become sperm producers. So that's why it's the same organ. And so it's going to go in either direction. So intersex people are going to be people where during the developmental process, potentially maybe a certain enzyme wasn't represented, or maybe there was an issue with the coding, or maybe there was a cell that didn't divide properly. And so they oftentimes end up with chromosomes that are different than how their physical body looks. Like you can be XX and actually be male. And so there's certain conditions and things like that. And so intersex is where during the reproductive process, there was an issue with the coding, an issue with the cell division, whatever it might be. And so as a result, these people do not have what would be typical reproductive anatomy or reproductive organs internally. And as a result, most of them end up infertile, which is sad, right? They did not choose this. And that's a travesty. It's just like all of us are born with a variety of different possible conditions. Some are born with vision that's poor. Others are born with hearing that's not very good. And so this is just what happens when something doesn't function or doesn't form as it should in the reproductive area. And that's what an intersex person is. It's a legitimate biological condition that causes certain problems with reproduction, but also even maybe just even some certain like heart conditions or things like that as well.
That's a really great description. So when you go back to the LGBTQIA, do intersex people largely identify as transgender, or do they disagree with that characterization? And I know we can't speak for every person who has this condition, but I'm just wondering, because it seems like there are a lot of people in that particular movement that benefit from confusing people about these categories rather than clarifying them. Yeah.
So yes. So someone who's intersex, if you look historically, they did not identify with the trans community. And part of the reason for that was because someone who is trans is actually born without any medical conditions, okay? So their reproductive organs function perfectly fine. Their genitalia functions fine. They've got the chromosomes that are typical for females or males to have. So there's nothing actually that has gone wrong with the reproductive system. Versus someone who's intersex, where there's something did go wrong. So someone who's trans is taking a body that's healthy and doing a variety of things to it to change it and alter it, something that's already healthy and that's already functioning well, which is versus an intersex person who did not choose this. They don't have the choice. They can't go from being infertile to now I can all of a sudden produce eggs, or I can all of a sudden produce sperm. They can't really do that. So intersex people don't choose it, whereas a trans community does choose it. And that is kind of the fundamental difference between the two is, and also, the gender, there's going to be this dysphoria with your body and these kind of things, whereas the intersex community doesn't really share that. So the trans community is much more of the mindset of there's something wrong with me and I want to change it from being what is actually a system that works well to something that is not going to function the same. And an intersex person, it starts out sadly in life with a system that isn't functioning as it should. And so as a result, they didn't want to be looped in because they're very different in their mindset. I think some of it's shifted a little bit in more recent years, but intersex people do not argue for any kind of child surgeries, especially when they're infants, because sometimes based on the intersex condition, your genitalia can be you can be born in a way where the doctor looks at the baby and is like, I don't know if they're male or female. They're not quite sure. And so some people will say, would do surgeries back then, and intersex people don't advocate for that. They say, leave the child alone. As it grows up, it will go towards one or the other. So they're very much against child surgeries and things like that. They want people to actually go through normal puberty and normal child development to determine. So that's very different as well than the trans community.
Okay, that's a great description. I think a lot of the people at, we're here in Colorado Springs area, Olympic committees for various sports all have their headquarters here, and they have decisions to make sometimes about whether this person should be allowed to participate in this sport. And it kind of came to a head last summer, I guess, when a boxer named Imane Khalif participated in the Olympics. And I know students were asking tons of questions of you about this summer at Summit. It seemed unfair. But the Olympic Committee said, look, this person is intersex. We don't know exactly whether this person should box in the male category or in the female category. And again, it was usually framed in the media for the purpose of creating confusion. So help us understand what was happening with this particular boxer based on the description that you have given, because I think this bears on this very, very big question about, especially about men playing in women's sports, which is, obviously a lot of women are reacting very strongly against this.
Oh, yeah, sure. And I was a hockey player for 20 some odd years. I started out in boys ice hockey because girls there wasn't as many girls teams. And there's functionally massive differences between girls sports and women's sports, and not just physically. I remember in more recent years, when you become an adult, hockey is very much co-ed. There's no more checking and the physicalness isn't there. So it's everybody's got to work. People are married. They got kids. They got to go work in the morning. Nobody's trying to get hurt. So it's a lot less physical. So it's usually co-ed that you play as an adult oftentimes. And I just remember, playing with the guys and being like, what are they doing? Like, I couldn't, why did you pass there? Why are you doing that? Like, I just was so confused. And then I go and play on my all girls team that I was playing on at the same time. And I'm like, I knew exactly where I need to go. I know where she's going. I know what she's doing. And it was so interesting. Years ago, as I was jostling this, I can't read the men the same way I can read the women. I know how the women think. And so there's other things beyond the physical that apply to sports. But with that said, so the it was a bit of a debacle. Okay, the Olympics were a bit of a debacle. This was early on, I think, in people trying to figure out what do we do about transgenderism in Olympic sports. And we've had this in previous Olympics, but this was obviously was risen very much to the surface. And I think the Olympic Committee was just uneducated and they just didn't know. I'm not blaming them. I'm not yelling at them. I'm just saying, I think that the intersex thing is understood by so few people that I think the Olympic Committee didn't really know what to do. So Imane Khalif is what they were saying is Imane Khalif, who was this boxer and was boxing in the women's division, was allowed to be in the Olympics because on Imane's birth certificate, it was labeled as a girl. So Imane is a girl on her birth certificate. Okay. So the Olympic Committee said that's kind of our ruling and she's a girl, so we're going to let her go and box. The challenge is Imane had been excluded from, I don't know if it's IBA, the International Boxing Association. I forget what it's called now. But she had been excluded previously because when they did genetic testing, Imane tested XY. So Imani tested XY. And the other thing that they found was that Imani had high levels of testosterone. Okay. So as soon as they said that, as soon as I read this during the summer, I'm like, I know exactly what's going on with Imani. Imani has a particular intersex condition called 5-alpha reductase deficiency. So 5-ARD. You don't have to write the big long words. 5-ARD. Okay. So as I'm looking at this, and it's something that I've taught to the Summit kids multiple times. This year, I taught it to them last year. I mean, I was getting so many messages from Summit. Over the last several months, I've gotten so many messages from Summit kids about gender and this thing and that thing and trying to sort through these things that I as soon as I heard what Imani had, I'm like, I know exactly what this condition is. And so this is why we need to be really careful, because I was actually at another event when this all started coming. So I didn't even know what was going on in the Olympics until I came back from the event. And at that point, I think Christians had criticized Imani for being transgender. And I think this is what had happened. There was all these posts. And I come back and I hear about high testosterone levels in XY. And I'm like, and girl on her birth certificate, I'm like, oh, this is an intersex condition. Imani's not transgender. So let me explain to you what is going on with Imani. In utero, testosterone is very, very key in males, okay? And testosterone is responsible for growing and forming both the internal reproductive organs, you could say, of men, as well as growing the external genitalia. Okay. In order to grow the external genitalia, there's a particular gene that provides the instructions for testosterone to convert to this super high level testosterone called DHT, dihydrotestosterone. Okay. So in order to grow the external genitalia, testosterone has to convert to DHT, which is like testosterone on crack. Okay. It's just high levels. And that's what grows the external genitalia. In somebody with 5-ARD, it's that enzyme in between testosterone and DHT, the enzyme that tells the body how to convert testosterone to DHT, that 5-ARD2 enzyme doesn't function or isn't present or isn't working. Something is going on. So the body is not able to make that conversion. So it's not able to grow the external genitalia as you would expect. Now the testosterone's there and it will do something. Okay, it will grow a little bit. And so what happens is babies born with this condition come out looking like larger than a female, but smaller than a male. And so doctors will look and say, okay, we think this is a girl. And so they're like, okay, it's a girl. You have a girl. Great. You have a girl. So you don't know any different. Most doctors, Imani's 25 years old. They weren't DNA testing babies at that age. So Imani is born, she's raised as a girl on her birth certificate, it's part of the girl things that you do and probably sleepovers or whatever, that she did growing up, and everything's normal. The family probably did not know anything different. And then puberty comes. And in puberty, they wonder, why isn't she started her cycle yet? Or testosterone levels soar in puberty for guys, and her external genitalia all of a sudden starts to grow. Now, you want to talk about being 15 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old, thinking you're a girl all this time, only to have your external genitalia all of a sudden start to grow, and the family realizes, oh my goodness, you're actually a boy. It's an actually devastating condition to have. And so when this happens and they realize, oh my goodness, you're a boy, there's a couple options here. Doctors can then put you on medication that's DHT, so testosterone DHT. So that's going to give you that souped up testosterone, that DHT, to help your external genitalia to really grow, so that you can become more male in your physical appearance. Or what happens is, and this happens, and I've heard other cases outside of Imani, is they're so embarrassed by the fact that they've told everybody they're a girl. They've acted like a girl. They've been wearing makeup or girl things. And now they're finding out they're a boy, that they're so embarrassed that they don't tell anybody. And what happens is they stay living as a girl Okay, because they're so embarrassed. So you can go one of two ways with it. I'm not talking about which way is right. I'm just saying here are the options that people have. Now, Imani lives in Algeria, which I believe is a predominantly Muslim country. So you need to understand this is an honor shame culture. And now you have told people all this time as a family that this is your daughter, only to find out actually she's a boy. That's going to be shameful. That's not an easy thing for the family to tell the culture to do, or to tell the culture about. So the fact that Imani has chosen to stay as a female doesn't surprise me within the cultural context that Imani is in. So is Imani a boy or girl? Imani is a boy. And the reason why Imani is a boy is not because of the XY chromosomes, not because of the high testosterone levels, but because her body formed along the male pathway. And it's possible, although it isn't likely, that Imani could produce sperm. So therefore, if you go back to the gametes, it's sperm or egg because its body formed as a sperm producer. Imani is a boy. So technically, Imani is a boy boxing against women in the Olympics. But this is not somebody that people should be mocking and just like, you got to be careful here. This is a real biological condition that Imani probably didn't know about until her teenage years, and was humiliated, is embarrassed by it. Isn't going to necessarily produce the same level of hair as other men. Like, there's going to be some other things that are going to be a little bit different there, but Imani is going to have an increased muscle mass because of her testosterone levels. Imani is going to have a deeper voice because of her testosterone levels. And she is going to form that male genitalia. So in an ideal world, Imani would be able to say to people, I'm actually a boy, and follow that pathway. Doesn't look like that's happening. That's a decision that Imani's made, but hopefully that gives some clarity to kind of what that situation was in the Olympics.
How many people, what percentage of the population are we talking about who suffer from a condition sort of like the one that Imani has?
So this one is so rare, they actually don't even know how many cases there are. This is a very, very rare condition. And I think, and the second boxer, I think, has the same condition, because I think they both tested XY with high testosterone. Imani, for sure, an article came out of, in the fall of 24, basically saying that they actually now have actually done the proper testing. And Imani, it does have 5 ARD, this condition I'm talking about. So we know that for certain now. I don't know if they've tested the other boxer yet. So we do know that Imani is male. And I was posting about it on Facebook and other places, and massive thanks to Summit, who also shared about it on their page, because it seemed like it was being blocked on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah. Like, it wasn't like, so I was really thankful to Summit, because so many of the kids I knew were going to be asking, or the students were going to be asking these questions. So this one is pretty rare. There's other ones that are going to be more common, such as something called Klinefelter, which is when you're XY male and then somehow you end up with an extra X chromosome. Once again, you usually end up infertile. You're actually going to have certain, I think it's heart conditions or neurological conditions because of it. So there's that one I think is going to be more common than this one. This one is extremely, extremely rare. But, these are the travesties that, when we live in a broken world where none of us fully form. A friend was just telling me the other day of her friend who's had a girl, and her fingers just didn't form, and so you have, a variety of things that could potentially go wrong during reproduction.
So we're talking about, you mentioned in a fallen world, we all bear the evidence of that in our genetic makeup, potential things that could go wrong and lead to different kinds of conditions or, cellular disruption. But there's the other issue, and I don't want to, I guess I'm trying to create a bridge to where people are in thinking about this issue. Because of people like Imani, because of these intersex conditions, there's confusion.
Yeah.
And then the confusion leads to a lot more people, in fact, a doubling, I think, about Americans under 18 who identify as transgender.
Right.
In other words, they're saying, in my particular case, I reject the binary,
Yeah.
most of the transgender students that we've worked with don't go back to the biology. That's not their thing. They're not denying that they are biologically male or female. They're just saying, in my head, I don't identify with my body and I feel this internal conflict.
Sure.
So when you talk about that with the Summit Ministries students, how do you approach that?
Well, I mean, one thing we need to keep in mind is imagine what it might be like. It's one thing to be at war with the culture or somebody from holds a different perspective than you. I mean, we're a culture that fights with anybody who holds a different perspective than us. But imagine if the battle is within. Imagine if the person you're at war with is yourself and you feel like something is wrong. And I think one of the things that I try to get across to some students and even other places I speak at is we need to be aware that people are hurting, that people are having a hard time loving themselves. And so much what we're seeing within what's happening in the gender community has to do with being me hurts. And so if I become this, whatever the this is, I will no longer be in pain. And so that's why you see the furries. I think the furry thing is just like the gender thing. You see young girls or boys saying, I feel like I'm a coyote or a fox or I'm a cat. And you're seeing schools put litter boxes in high school bathrooms. So young people who are identifying as cats can use a litter box instead of the toilet, right? You're seeing the same kind of mindset of being me is painful. And so if I can become something else, a cat, or if in my case, as a female, if I can become a male, then that will make the pain go away. And so oftentimes I think people, it's easy to get frustrated when somebody doesn't think like you. And you say, what's wrong with you? How are you so stupid? Like, look at the biology, look at the facts. But we have to understand that there's so many things playing into the pain that our young people are feeling. And you look at the CDC study that came out, I think it was early 23, talks about our mental health rates are the highest they've ever been for our young adults and teenagers, the highest mental health rates we've ever seen.
I mean, mental health, so things like anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, not that they're healthier than they've ever been, they're less healthy than they've ever been.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Thanks for clarifying that. You're right. Because that's what matters. And so we have people that are saying, I don't know how to live. And I think it stems back to something much larger, that we, especially in the Western world, we live so well compared to any other society before us. When we're hot, we have air conditioning. When we're cold, we have heat. We have food. We've got clothing. We've got an abundance of clothing or an abundance of this thing, so much so that we've got so much stuff that we're renting out storage units to store the stuff that we have. We have so many things. We've got such an abundance of pleasure that we don't know how to live in pain. And we've lost this ability to realize when something hurts, how do I function well? And so we escape it because we don't know how to deal with pain. And so that's what I see what's happening with so much of what's happening within gender community. Yes, you're right that they acknowledge the biological sex. They do. They just say the biological sex got it wrong. And what I'm feeling, what my thoughts are, this is truth and this is accuracy. And so the way for me to alleviate the pain is to follow my feelings. The problem is that when people follow their feelings and they go through a transition process, I don't go to a doctor and say, I want to be put on puberty blockers and I want hormones to turn me into a cat or turn me into a monkey or turn me into some other animal. I say I want hormones and puberty blockers to turn me into a man, a boy. So I'm acknowledging that there is a biological component to making me male, but I denied the biological component that makes me female in the beginning, only to go through a transitioning and affirming by the kind of medication I'm getting that being male is more than thoughts and feelings. There is a biological component with it, and there's a contradiction. You can't deny it on the front end and affirm it on the back end. And so I think that's what we're seeing is we're seeing people trying to figure out how to deal with maybe they've been abused, their mental illness, their fear of growing up and being a female or being a male, or their obsession with the other sex, the hypersexualized ideas of the other sex. The list goes on. You're seeing people make these changes to deal with whatever variety of condition that they have.
One of the statistics that you give in one of your talks is, and I have this a quote here, thanks to Justin, who did some great prep on this. Before 2012, there was no scientific literature on girls ages 11 to 21 ever having developed gender dysphoria at all. So clearly there's a huge shift that has taken place.
Absolutely.
In the last 3-5 years, even though, transgender has been a category that's been talked about for 30 some years.
Oh yeah.
It's the last 3 or 4 years where this is really taken off. Because we're talking specifically about girls now, what do you sense is happening from the research that you've done and the people that you interact with because you're out there more than most of us in talking about these tough issues with real people? Yeah.
So that, what you read about there being no studies before 2012 on girls having gender dysphoria at all, that comes from Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, which I would encourage everybody listening to read that book. I think it's the book that opened up Pandora's box on this. And Abigail Schreier has completely changed so much by exposing what's really been going on. And massive kudos to her to be brave enough to do that. I would also encourage people to listen to Jordan Peterson and Chloe Cole's interview, because Chloe Cole is what's a detransitioner. So I think she started puberty blockers at 12, testosterone at 13, double mastectomy at 15, and detransition at 17. I think those are the ages. And it's brilliant to listen to him as a therapist. You see Jordan Peterson as an actual therapist.
Yeah.
And what you're going to find in these young girls like Chloe Cole is that they are struggling from a variety of at least one, if not two or more of 4 medical conditions: depression, anxiety, ADHD, and autism. Okay. And almost every single case of gender amongst young girls, and you're going to see this amongst young boys as well. They already are depressed. They already have anxiety. They already have ADHD, or they already have autism before any feelings of gender dysphoria come about. And so what has shifted, in Chloe Cole's case, she's autistic. And what has shifted is that, like you said, gender was something that was around it's been around. It's not new. But it was typically within 2, 3, 4-year-old little boys who said, I feel like I'm a girl. I like mommy's high heels. I like to wear makeup like mommy. I want to do things mommy does. I'm a girl. So think of Jazz Jennings, TLC's I'm Just Jazz. That's your classic situation of gender dysphoria. Girls, this was not heard of. Okay. And now to have girls greatly outnumber the boys that are transitioning, that's what's raised all the flags. Something is going on. And that's what's led to this idea of the rapid onset gender dysphoria and the way that girls relate. I'm sure you've talked about all of that in your previous podcast, but girls basically are finding it hard to be girls. Mental illness, some of them have been sexually abused, and they think if I become a boy, I can protect myself from abuse. I think some of that is playing out in the adult women transitioning piece as well. And there's very little study on adult women transitioning, but I'm wondering if some of that is playing out in that piece as well. Some girls are scared to be girls because, they're being bullied and they can't defend themselves, or maybe they're told, well, you're going to have your period. It's going to be horrible. You're going to have to give birth to a baby and it's horrible. Or you're told you're not going to get paid as much as a man. You're going to be discriminated against. So they're scared to be girls. And there's various things. Mental illness is pretty much almost always there. And so that's what's caused this change. We got this rise in mental illness. We have the effects of social media telling people that the solution to their problems is to transition, and then they'll be happy. And all they want is to be happy because they're depressed. And so then they're following along, and girls relate and connect with each other and transition in groups because they take on each other's pain. When one's crying, they're all crying because they just empathize with each other. And so that's where you're seeing, that's what's made this whole thing so wild, is you've seen this massive increase in young girls when traditionally it was very rare, and it was only amongst young boys, 2, 3, 4 years old, identifying as trans.
So now we're in a place where a lot of people are saying, well, and I think that one of the attorneys, Chance Strangio, who argued before the Supreme Court, took testosterone, was able to grow facial hair, and says that that's brought comfort.
Yeah.
But one thing that you point out to the students is that's not really actually happening. The idea of transitioning, because it's biologically impossible, and because the issue is not biological to begin with, actually worsens the situation.
It does. And so here's part what happens, okay? Is what makes this tricky is that testosterone is a natural antidepressant, anti-anxiety med. Okay. So this young girl who most likely had some sort of mental health, like one of those golden four, their anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism, had one of those four, starts taking testosterone, and it calms the depression and anxiety. Estrogen does do the same thing in guys, by the way. Okay. And so what happens is it lets you feel like, hey, guess what? This is what I needed. I'm not as sad anymore. Right? I'm not as anxious anymore. And so it is a bummer that it does that, because it's deceiving for people. So in the case of this attorney, you're right, grew facial hair, voice is deeper, these kind of things. The body is going to shift where the fat is stored, because the testosterone is going to shift where the body stores fat, because men store fat in different places than women. And so it was Travis, right? Is that the name? Travis?
Chase. I'm sorry, Chase. Chase.
Okay.
Yeah. I got somebody on our team named Chance, so I get that confused. But Chase Strangio.
Chase, yeah. So here is the interesting thing. They have done studies, and I've seen a second study that just came out recently. But the first study I saw on this from the American Neurological Association actually looked at overall psychiatric encounters, both before and after gender affirming surgeries. Okay. And they found that the overall risk of psychiatric encounters for girls becoming men went down after surgery. Okay. However, in men, it went up after surgery. What's more important to me is this idea of suicide. And the suicide rates went up for men trying to become women, went up post-surgery. Women, it stayed the same. So women becoming men stayed the same. But it went up post-surgery in terms of their suicidal attempts.
Okay.
Which is interesting. So you're going to see it seems like the man to female transition is extremely problematic. They have before and after surgery, out of 193, 38, it was a 12.8% had a risk of psychiatric encounters before, and 13.7 afterwards. So it did go up. And so you're going to find various things on this. I'm interested as more studies come out. There's a second one that came out, and it's actually showing that people aren't as well afterwards. And I think that's going to be the idea that people are not, even though that study seemed to show something different in terms of mental health afterwards. What we're seeing overwhelming is opposite to what that particular study said with mental health, where we're finding that people are very much not happy afterwards because of the fact that they're still depressed, anxious, have ADHD, autism, and they never received care for that. So that's why you have such a large number of detransitioners, because they are now in their 20s, when your body kind of calms down in terms of psychologically, and you actually like yourself, and you're actually like, wow, I actually am okay that I was born female, or I'm okay that I'm born male, but they've mutilated their bodies.
Yeah.
So that's when the real psychological stuff comes out, because now they're like, oh my goodness, what have I done? I can't have kids. I can't do this, you know? So I am interested as more and more of this comes out, what we're going to find. What I see practically is that people are not happier it's a larger percentage that aren't happier post treatment than before, specifically post surgery amongst men to women. They're more suicidal afterwards. So we'll have to see. So these are some of the preliminary stuff that's coming out.
Well, this has been very thorough, and we have talked about transgender before on this show a number of different times. We had a series with Brandon Showalter. So the show at the time was called The Dr. Jeff Show. But if you're watching or listening and you're interested in that, you can go back and look at that. But I'd love to just, as we wrap up here, Alycia, hear your thoughts about when you speak to a church on this topic. Because at the beginning you mentioned pastors and youth pastors are crying out for help on this topic. How do you encourage the body of Christ to respond?
Yeah. So I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and I remember the LGB stuff, lesbian, gay, bi, that was a big thing then. You had AIDS, you had a lot of people dying from AIDS. And I remember seeing Christians being very just ugly towards the people who, towards, I guess you could say, just the gay community, whether they had AIDS or not. And I just remember being mortified, even as a teenager, because I just felt like, the story in, John chapter 7 and 8 of the woman who's caught in the act of adultery. And, there's discussion about whether or not it's really in the original text and all these things. But I remember thinking then, replace that woman with somebody who's gay. And you got the religious leaders throwing this person at the feet of Jesus and saying, look at them, they're a sinner. Look, we caught them. And you see in that story, Jesus, in a sense, protect that woman from the religious people who thought they were so great because they were so good. That's why he challenged them about, okay, you're so good, then go ahead and throw the first stone. He challenged their deeds. He didn't challenge the laws. He didn't challenge, he challenged, are you really, truly better? And I think as a teenager looking at that story, and just in my mind, I just felt like it would be that person who was gay, who's fallen at the feet of Jesus, caught in their sin, humiliated and shamed. And Jesus doesn't affirm the sin. At the end of that story, he tells her, don't do this again. Go, don't sin again. But he affirmed the value that you are important to me, that you matter to me, even in your sinful state. And I remember just watching the church not show that. Sometimes it's so easy for us to become Pharisees and mock people who aren't as good as we are. The story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Tax collector beats his breast and is like, God, forgive me, I'm a sinner. The Pharisee looking back saying, thank you, God, I'm not like him because I fast. I do all of these things. I'm not like him. And you look at that story and I'm like, man, how often have we fallen into the Pharisee boat again? And I was just remember being devastated as a teenager, because how was somebody supposed to want to know Jesus when he's never presented as beautiful? He's never presented as good, right? Romans 5 tells us he died for the sinners. So he died for them. That's a story that they need to know. So I think when I look at what's happening with the gender and I look at how the church messed up, and I tell people, be careful who you oppress, because no group stays oppressed forever. They rise up and they remember their oppressor. Okay? And the LGB rose up and they remembered how the church mocked them and criticized them. And I'm not at all saying it isn't a sin. It is a sin. I do not believe that homosexuality is the way that God has designed us to best function. But I do think there's a way that he wants us to respond to the sinner. And so I think when I communicate to churches, I want people to realize, look, the gender topic really isn't being fought by the Christians. It's not being fought by the conservatives. It's not being fought by the Republicans. I think this latest election showed it. I think the gender topic is a massive reason why Kamala lost, because so many people left the Democratic Party because of this gender topic. It is overwhelmingly being fought by people who are not Christians, by just the culture. The atheist Richard Dawkins challenges this whole thing. He's like, it's about your, he says it's your chromosomes, right? He thinks this is so ridiculous, right? So it's being fought not by the Christians, but by the culture. And the culture is fighting against what the transgender movement is doing. And so as they continue to get rejected by the culture, my question for the Christians is, can they find a home with a believer? In other words, saying, I know the culture hates me, but will the Christians still love me in my mutilated body? Will the Christians still love me even though I haven't detransitioned? Can they find a way? I know they disagree with me, but the culture hates me. They won't talk to me because I do things that they think that are different to what they want. Will the Christians at least talk to me? And I would just love for us to somehow find a way to represent Christ to our people around us that are struggling with gender dysphoria. Doesn't mean that you cover up things. Doesn't mean that you affirm things. Doesn't mean you lie. Okay, it's okay to make the truth known. But somebody who's dealing with gender dysphoria or any of the LGBT, lesbian, gay, bi issues is no different than your neighbor who's heterosexually living with somebody they're not married to, right? So we need to stop putting these things in separate positions and realize, how is it that we love our neighbor who's heterosexually living in a sinful relationship? How do we love the people from the trans community? And that's really something that I would love for the church to do. And that's kind of where one of my messages to the church is, let's be different. Can we get it right this time?
It's a huge challenge. And I know this is a tough one, because pastors and youth pastors and other people in the church are asking, well, how much do we accept people if they're not apparently being transformed by the power of Christ, and the gospel, and what do we consider to be a Christian? There are tons of things that have to be thought through here.
Yeah.
So our goal is not to say, hey, it's this easy. Just accept everybody the way they are. The whole point of the gospel is that Jesus changes us to become like him, away from whatever is happening in our lives or whatever we've even done to ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And that's why there's a young lady, I'm forgetting her name now, Lexi, actually. So I think that's it, who transitioned to being male, became a Christian. And it was probably 2-3 years into her Christianity when the Lord said to her, I want you to give me your gender. And so in those 3 years, Lexi grew in her knowledge of Christ and reading the word and digging in. And I think what happens is we oftentimes want some of those things happen right away. I don't think the Holy Spirit always works like that. I think it's a process. I think sanctification is always a process. And so that's why I keep telling people, look, you can take somebody who's gay and make them straight. If you have the power to do that, go ahead. You can make them straight, but you have brought them no closer to Jesus. Now they're just going to hell straight instead of gay. You haven't done anything eternally. We connect people to Jesus and we allow the Holy Spirit to convict. And just like you said, Jeff, he will transform us into being like him. It just may not always be at the pace that we expect. And when the Lord told Lexi, okay, it's time, she was angry. Why didn't you tell me this? Because at this point she had double mastectomy. Why didn't you tell me this before? This is the timing. And then the Lord, she did. She completely reverted back. She was able to actually give birth and actually have a child. She's married to a man and all these kind of things. But it did take some time. And I think that's why my focus is always connect people to Jesus and allow the Holy Spirit, who's so much better at conviction, begin that transformational work. Because there's so many deep things in there that he's working on versus just the surface stuff that we see, So I think you're absolutely right. That transformation is key. I just don't know when it happens.
That is that's huge. Even I was just speaking with a group of leaders about Israel versus Palestine issue. And they said, well, a lot of the Jews in Israel are not, they're not serious about their faith and they're not coming closer to Christ. And I said, well, I look at my own Christian journey and it took me a long time from the time that I knew the truth to the time that my heart submitted to obeying the truth.
Yeah.
And, I don't know at what point we say, well, you're not here at this standard yet. So we can't fellowship with you. I think this is super tough.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
That is tough. I don't know.
Well, let's just pray that the Holy Spirit continues to guide us and give us a sense of what to do, and gives us His perspective, because ultimately that's what we pray, right? That's our Lord's Prayer. It's not my will be done on earth as it is in heaven, not my timing be done on earth as it is in heaven, but your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Wow. Yeah. Alycia, I didn't know that would be the direction we would go at the very end of the show here, but it's a very powerful, humbling way to conclude. And thank you for guiding us through not only the biology, but what's happening socially and all of these other areas that'll give us good perspective.
Yeah. No, thank you for having me. I know the biology may have been a lot. If I could just tell people, I wrote an article on Intersex, which hopefully will make things a bit easier. Just go to apologetics.org and you'll find the article there. Just search for Intersex. I will tell you, there's so many times in looking through Intersex and even reading about detransitioners where I just have to stop. Because I'm like, oh my goodness, Lord, it's just it does rip your heart out. They didn't choose this. They didn't choose this. And so many people who are intersex just would love to be a parent, would love to be a mom, would love to be a dad. And life didn't give them that. So I'll just say that I think when I study intersex, I think I began to realize how miraculous it is that so many of us are born without whatever the situation, without any sort of massive major condition, because there's so many things that could go wrong.
Yeah.
And so I'll just say really quickly, 30 seconds, there's an intersex condition called Turner syndrome, where it's a female, but she only ends up with one X, not two, causes all kind of problems. And the body actually aborts 99% of the time. The body just self-aborts, and the mother miscarries that little girl because the body just can't help form that baby. But 1% to 2% survive. And they're born with an intersex condition. They aren't able to have children. There's other physical things that go on. And so while somebody may look at them and say, well, look at this thing that's happened to you. If they knew that the body, 90 to 99% of them the body self-aborts, you'd realize that actually the few people that are born with Turner syndrome are the miracle babies that survived. And to me, there's something beautiful about that even in what can go wrong, that there is still some beautiful life that still is sometimes able to come forward. And so while she'll suffer from a variety of conditions, at least she was able to live. And so I just think that these are hard. These are hard things, and intersex conditions should break our heart. They should grieve us. Yeah.
Thanks, Alycia, for coming on the show today. We're really grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you to my guest, Alycia Wood, for coming on the show. I'm glad that at places like Summit Ministries, we can talk about these really tough topics. And I'm going to be mulling this over for quite some time, because I think as we've talked, I'm thinking about the work of the Holy Spirit in a new way. How does Jesus bring about transformation in the lives of people? Well, if Alycia's topic today is something that's of interest to you, you can find more about her work at apologetics.org, including an article that she mentioned about intersex issues. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries, and at Summit, we are coming alongside this rising generation, those who train them, their parents, their influencers, so that young adults may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. We want to help you. We want you to be able to go to Summit Ministries to get the resources that you need to help others. If that's something of interest to you, just go to summit.org and you'll see the links there where you can get started. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.